That was really, really interesting session. So hopefully, what we're going to talk about next will help more people to take that forward. So yeah, so my name's Rose Rivera. I'm the local nature partnership coordinator for Neath Port Talbot and Rhondda Cynon Taf, so hosted by the two councils. And there are LNP coordinators hosted by each local authority or national park authority area in Wales, funded by the LNP Cymru project. And our role really is to support the local nature partnerships in their work taking action for nature. So as we've seen, there's a huge rise in public support for wildflower verges. There's a need to take action to tackle the nature crisis, and these big campaigns like the Plant Life Road Verge campaign that we've just been hearing about, they're getting bigger every year. And so us as LNP coordinators are really interested in how we can support you and support our host authorities in creating and enhancing and maintaining these wildflower verges. So through this project, we've also been really lucky enough to receive funds from the Welsh Government Local Places for Nature Fund. So that allows many of us the options this year to purchase machinery to help us manage roadside verges and wildflower grasslands. As we've heard from Kate, you need to cut and collect. So often this requires specialist machinery. So yeah, so this means that cut and collect machinery has been a hot topic of conversation this year. Many discussions have taken place between ourselves and with our authority street care and grounds maintenance teams to determine the most appropriate machines for the job. So the idea of this session now is to share with you some of the machines that were purchased as a result of these discussions. And I have to say a big thank you to our colleagues from around Wales who've taken time to go out and film these machines in action and give us a bit of insight into their thoughts about the machines. So what we're going to do is show you a video of all these machines out in the field doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then I'm going to be joined by a panel of a few of our staff from around Wales to have a bit of a discussion about the machines and to answer some of your questions. So please do put questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of these machines.
My name is Rose. I work for RCT Local Nature Partnership, employed by RCT Council. And today we wanted to show you our new machine, which is the Amazon Profi Hopper 1500. And this machine was selected to do the maintenance on our grass verges, where we are managing areas for biodiversity and for use in our parks and cemeteries and countryside sites as well. The idea of this machine is for it to cut and collect longer grass, and we therefore selected this product for its size. It has a 1.5 metre cutting width, which enables us to use it on narrower verges. And the collection box has a capacity of 1600 litres, which enables us to collect as much grass as possible in one run. It also has capacity to elevate the box, so it can be tipped into the back of a lorry if required. We also selected this machine because there's really very little maintenance issues. It's really easy to access the flails, and you can really easily adjust the cutting heights. It's also adaptable enough to be used for normal grass cutting if required. So the Amazon Profi Hopper 1500, it cost us just under £50,000, and we were able to purchase this machine through the Welsh Government Local Places for Nature Fund. The package includes the machine and the mirrors as well. It's worth bearing in mind that if you want the machine to be usable on the road, you need to register it with the DVLA. What do we think about this machine? Basically, though the primary use of it will be for wildflower verges, today we trialled it in the meadow at Kevin Park Cemetery. This is quite a large expanse of grass. So while we're really impressed with the cut of the machine, it's worth bearing in mind that the collection capacity doesn't go very far on an area this large. So we are hopeful, though, that for its main use, which will be on verges, the capacity is going to be more than enough. and we'll be able to create habitat piles periodically along the verge. So this is the Amazon GHS Drive Groundskeeper Smart Cut trailed machine, which is used by Merthyr Tydfil Council in their parks department. So the biodiversity areas within their parks were chosen by the council and 6 sites have been identified. This machine, it's a 2.1 metre collector. It cost approximately £25,000. And they chose this machine following demonstrations and after consultation with their staff and from speaking to other neighbouring councils, they decided this was the best machine on the market to help improve the biodiversity strategy of open spaces and grasslands. It's simple to use and it's got high lift capacity, which allows them to remove arisings from the site. So it's a good machine for a place that's where you might need to do that.
Using the soft hard cut and collect machine, which is a machine which is specifically devised for sites like these, quite large. The machine can also cut wet sites, certainly damp grass. It's operating using a truck system similar to that of tanks. It also has a chute system, which is quite different from the smaller machine that we have, the Amazon, which uses a roller system to bring the grass into the collection box. For a site of this size, you're looking at a couple of days for this machine to cut it. Obviously, this is a site we wouldn't consider for the Amazon for that very reason. The benefit of a machine like this one is that it not only can it cut wet sites, it also can form large habitat piles with the clippings, which are left in situ for reptiles and small mammals. The deck capacity or cutting capacity is about 1,500 L. Which is quite substantial, and the estimated capacity of the box and the rail is between 2 and 2.5 tons of clippings, which is quite substantial. The benefit of this machine obviously is that it works on trucks, it can cut any form of sites, but one of the major drawbacks obviously is because it's operated on trucks, it requires a very special license, a tank license in this instance. It also has to be towed at the back of a truck, at the back of a tractor and a trailer. With the combined, the tractor and trailer actually have a combined capacity of 12 tons. The added benefit of this machine also, because it's a flail system, is that it can cut through small saplings, thick fern, brambles, without even second thoughts, and the quality of the cut remains quite good from the beginning to the end.
I'm Lucy, and I'm the Support LMP Coordinator for the Monmouth Newport LMP and Biodiversity Education Officer for Newport City Council. This year, with the Environmental Growth Grant, we purchased the Rytek C2200 CHS Super Heavy Duty Flail Mounted Collector, priced at £12,500 excluding VAT. We chose this particular piece of machinery for its suitability to fit the tractors that we already use. Its robustness, its strong chassis and its ability to work in harsher wet environments with undulating ground. The floating linkage allows the machine to follow the contours of the ground. We also liked it for its high and low tip in action, meaning that we can tip both on site or into the back of another vehicle, giving us a little more versatility. The Super version has a strong flail rotor and mountings and heavy-duty rotor bearings and skids, making this machine suitable to use on roadside verges, like this one here, the A468. It's also particularly useful for the uneven ground that we have in some of our leave-to-grow areas in our cemeteries. Its main features are its adjustable cutting width of up to 2.2 metres, the adjustable rear roller and its 2.6 cubic metre collection capacity. To date, we have used this machinery in green spaces, selected roadside verges and our cemeteries, and we haven't had any teething problems. We are now in the process of identifying further sites for its use for next year.
My name's Mark Cleaver and I work for the Monmouth County Council's Grounds and Cleansing team. This video is going to show you our 3 cut and collect machines purchased for the management of grassland for pollinators. With a little experience of managing grassland for pollinators, we looked around at what other people were doing. South Wales Trunk Road Agency were using this machine to cut road verges on the strategic road network. It looked ideal for some of the work that we were trying to do. A few years later we secured some extra funding to buy a second machine. Learning from the experience we had from the first one, we decided to buy a machine with a high lift discharge. This gives us the capacity to remove the grass rather than dumping on site. It can be discharged into a transit tipper or onto a trailer so the grass can be taken away. Whilst these 2 machines are ideal for medium-sized areas, we wanted to extend this scheme to some of our smaller open spaces and onto urban road verges. For this we needed something more manoeuvrable. As a dedicated ride-on cut and collect machine with rear wheel steer, it's exceptionally manoeuvrable. It has a facility to be used as cut and collect or cut and fly, which means it can be used in normal grass cutting grounds. It's also quite a neat cut, which means it can be used in more formal cut and collect areas as well as in meadow areas. In addition to cutting and collecting, the machine can also be used to pick up leaves. It's fairly straightforward to add a scarifying blade, so you can use it to prepare grassland in readiness for oversowing with a wildflower mix to increase species diversity of grassland. We've tried it here for the first time in Goiter in partnership with a project with the Community Council. It's important to recognise some of the logistical challenges around managing meadow type grassland on some amenity open spaces. How do you dispose of the grass? In some circumstances it can be disposed of on site, but quite often you may need to take it away. We have recently secured funding for 2 more Amazon mowers and also for 2 caged tipping trailers, which means we can tow the Amazon mower out onto site, tip into the trailer and take the grass cuttings away. If you have any questions about our experiences, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you very much.
This piece of equipment is the Rytek M1200CH. It's a piece of equipment that we've bought so we can cut the meadows across the national park. It's quite a small piece of equipment. It fits quite nicely on the back of this tractor, which is one of the main reasons why we bought it. Any bigger bit of kit, once it lifts up, as you can see, it's in the raised position at the moment. If it goes any higher than that, and we had a bigger Rytek on the back, it tends to lift the front of the trailer or the tractor up. As you can see, it's not ideal cutting conditions today. The ground is damp, and one of the drawbacks that we've got with this machine is that the hopper, if it's thick grass and it's really wet, it does start to clog up a little bit and it becomes problematic. But today the wind's dried out the bracken and some of the grass, and it's cutting okay, and it's producing a better cut than we actually anticipated. As you can see, we've got young trees in here, and it's going around these trees without touching them, so it's doing exactly what we wanted to do. Anyway, so that in essence is what we're trying to achieve. What I'll do now is get the machine in actions and do some video of it working up and down the grass area.
Hi, I'm Alex and I'm an Assistant Ranger for the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Countryside Service team. Today I'm going to tell you about our new Avant 635 multiloader. It's a versatile, compact machine with an easy coupling system, and we purchased it to manage and maintain grassland areas both on council-owned land and community sites. With the additional attachments we purchased, we can perform many other maintenance jobs around sites as well. It has a hydrostatic four-wheel drive with diff lock and articulated steering, which makes it both highly manoeuvrable and good on many different ground types. It cost us around £40,000 for the machine, front flail, the collector mower, forks, bucket and a hedge trimmer attachment. We also purchased rear-mounted counterbalance weights to aid lifting capacity, and we brought a plant trailer to transport it across sites. The height-adjustable front flail has a cutting width of 1200mm and cuts between 25 and 100mm high. It is used for cutting long grass, scrub and brush. The collecting mower has a 1500mm cutting width, cutting heights between 25 and 100mm, and an 800 litre collector box. The box has a float system that allows it to work on undulating ground, and the lid is hydraulically controlled by the driver via controls in the cab. We haven't had this machine for very long, but first impressions are that it will greatly aid our productivity around sites. The range of attachments and the simple method of changing them over makes it very easy to use. We tested the mower collector during the dry spell at the end of September 2020, and while it struggled a bit with the woodier stems of plants such as knapweed, it worked well with dry, finely mulched meadow grass. It should be noted that large expanses of meadow will require many trips to unload the collector box. The front flail is very effective at clearing areas of long grass and scrub quickly, and the machine feels stable on most ground types. It has a tight turning circle, making it good in small areas. A hedge trimmer attachment was used to cut back hedging on both sides of a path, which totalled just over 1 kilometre in length, and could easily be used to cut back hedges bordering sites, providing the access is good. The front forks and bucket have been used for many tasks, from transporting bags of materials to the job site through to removing logs and brash after completing tree work, and they've both proved to be very useful. Points to consider for this machine would be storage, as the machine and the many attachments take up lots of garage space, and it needs plenty of parking space at the job site, as it needs to be reversed off the plant trailer. Please feel free to contact me with any other questions you may have. I can be reached on 01446 733 589 or emailed at aledwards@valeofglamorgan.gov.uk. Thanks for watching. Alex.
My name's Joe Wally. I'm the Ecology Officer for Denbighshire County Council. I've been working with my colleagues in Countryside Services and Highways and Street Scene to create wildflower meadows throughout the public realm in Denbighshire. These sites are often quite awkward to manage and can't be done with the existing equipment we've got, so we've had to look at purchasing new equipment to allow us to cut and collect at the end of the season. We opted to use the Trackmaster BCS 630 WS Bank Commander walk behind mower, which allows us to use a variety of implements to manage our grasslands. In this clip you can see us using the 4-foot wide cutting bar to quickly and effectively cut a long strip through the grassland. This is quicker and more effective than using brush cutters or other alternative equipment on these steep slopes. With the twin wheel kit, this machine will work on slopes up to 40 degrees in incline. Using the quick coupling attachment, it's quick and easy to change between implements in the field. In this clip we're using the hay rake attachment to line up the recently cut material ready for collection and removal from the site. After cutting and raking, we use the baler attachment to collect all of the material from the site, ready for removal. Each bale takes approximately 40 seconds to produce, and the machine has a total output of approximately 1,500 kilograms per hour. The bales the machine produces are roughly 20 to 25 kilograms, and once they're wrapped are easily removed from the back of the machine. The bales can be disposed of on site with the bale wrap removed, or are convenient and easy to remove from site with use of a trailer or vehicle. This has proven to be an incredibly effective way of introducing cut and collect management to awkward to access or steeply sloping sites. This has allowed us to create and manage new wildflower meadows at sites where this was previously not possible.
Okay, so I hope everyone enjoyed seeing these machines in action. Some of them are really quite impressive, I think we can agree. And I'm hopefully going to be joined now by our panel. So we don't have representatives from every council or every machine that was shown today, but we have got Steve Davis from Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, Marie Fowler from Rhondda and Taff Council, Mark Cleaver from Monmouthshire County Council, and Joel Wally from Denbighshire County Council. So hopefully, technological issues notwithstanding, we should have everyone able to join us. If you have particular questions about a specific machine and the person's not here at the moment, do put them in the chat anyway, because we'll do our best to get them to the relevant person. But I just wanted to kickstart the discussion by asking our panel now that you've seen some of the other machines that are on the market that people have gone for, are you tempted by any of them, or are you happy with what you went with initially?
I think I'm quite happy with what I went for. In the sense of it's suitable for our sites. I find it quite interesting when we're using the pedestrian sort of flails with the attachments that enable you to sort of create bales and things like that. I mean, it creates other issues in the sense of the recycling of the plastic then, because obviously each bale has to be wrapped up somewhere. So perhaps that's another consideration. But certainly I like the aspect of them, because I know that from personal experience using them on sites when I worked in another life. That these machines are really good, especially on slopes and banks. So it's certainly something worth considering for next time around.
Yeah,
I
think
sorry, on the walk behind equipment, I was very tempted when we were looking for machinery to cut some of our smaller locations. I believe that you can get a sisal string type wrap for the round, or one of the models of round baler, which would do away with perhaps the plastic issue. We decided to go for the Amazon though, because I suppose it was a more familiar type of way of working for our grounds staff. We thought it was something that they would be more familiar and happy to work with. And I was also a little concerned about the manual handling issues of pulling the bale out of the walk behind baler. It looked a little bit awkward on the videos I saw. But I think all the machines have got various strengths and weaknesses, and it was really quite interesting seeing all the different ones available.
I think as we look to expand our grass cutting and things like that, we would be looking at some of the other machines that are obviously much better at bigger areas to just increase speed and efficiency. So as we've started out with kind of the more awkward areas to manage anyway and trying to tackle that, I think it's it's been really useful to use the walk behind stuff. And obviously it's got a lot of different implements as well, so we can we can look at scarifying the ground as well and all sorts of other things like that to sort of look at different management of these sites. But at this point in time, as we're looking to expand, I think there were some really interesting alternatives on there that would handle bigger areas better than what we have at the moment.
I was going to ask how many sort of sites you're looking at the moment, Joel, and using with that machine.
Yeah, so our sites at the moment, we've done it as part of a pilot project. So we've got about 21 sites and around 44 to 48 acres of land that we're managing with that. So it's proven quite effective on that, but obviously going forward we're looking at some of the other things. The kind of high lift options seem really useful actually when you're talking about the public realm sites, where as some of the presentations discussed, it's it's quite important to get the cuttings off those sites. They're less tolerated in those locations. So that's the sort of thing we're looking for going forward.
We have got Steve with us on mic. I think his video's not working, but Steve, did you fancy any of the other machines?
I must admit I was very taken by the one that you could use in the water. I don't think I could afford that, but it was very impressive, that was. And in a past life I would have definitely had that bit of kit. Going on to the kit that we got, I think from what we've used so far, it's proved very versatile. And we're quite pleased with some of the results it's had. I primarily bought it again to try and get some of the heather and the bracken sorted out on some of the coastland areas. But anyway, we'll see what happens later on in the year with that.
Brill. I think you touched on this, Mark, but Lucia's asked about natural wrapping materials for making the bales. Has anyone done any investigation into that?
As I say, when I was doing a search, I'm sure one of the manufacturers of a walk behind baler, and I can't remember which one for the life of me, did say that they provided a sisal string type wrap, which was obviously a natural product. So it was something that was a consideration. I'd just like to add, the other thing that we and I'll talk about later on is the logistics of what to do with the grass afterwards, and it's handling having small bales struck me as actually quite a convenient way of handling them. It's one thing tipping a great big pile of grass, but it's then what do you do with it at the other end, and I think and where you put it. So I was quite taken by it. In a previous life, in a more conservation type role, it certainly would have been a direction I would have gone in. I think one of the England Wildlife Trusts use a similar system too.
Well, is this a good point at which to talk about arisings then? Because that is something that always comes up as a stumbling block, I think, when you approach your street care teams, or what do you do with all that, the arisings on the side of the road? And I know in my role, and we're just going into purchasing cut and collect machines in Neathport Harbour Council now. And one of the things we're looking at is just focusing on verges where there is places that we can hide the arisings in the side of the road. but how are people getting around that? How do people collect them and take them off site, or leave them there?
I mean, with Rundakan and Taff, with the main verges, like for instance the Churchill Leach bypass, like Liam mentioned earlier on, we do manage to create habitat piles on those sites. Within our countryside sites, we can also do that, so this is not an issue. But when you start looking at sites such as cemeteries, or and then hopefully going forward housing estates, etc., it's not always going to be possible. So what our street care team, because it's our street care team now, we're sort of starting to take over the sort of the grass management. What they're doing is looking into tipping the grass into the back of an ash cart, and then the ash cart then disposes of the green waste, and it goes towards their figures as green waste recycling. I mean, one of the issues that's been discussed previously is the issue, obviously, of contamination, whether it's through litter or through dog fouling. The way for us to overcome the issue of the litter is by having the teams coordinating to have litter pickers on site to collect sort of litter pick before you go and cut, which seems to be working quite well. The dog fouling, however, that's something that I think every authority is going to have issues with, because we don't really know how to counteract that, because we all know these sites, whether you're talking, I mean, not necessarily grass verges, but certainly in the parks and countryside spaces, dog fouling is going to be an issue, and certainly it would be also on housing estates. So this is something that I think every local authority is just going to have to sort of figure out a way of dealing with it.
I'd like to talk about a couple of different ways that we're dealing with it. Obviously, the council green waste is the easiest way, but it's not necessarily cheap. There's obviously a cost element to it. We are looking around the county for places we can compost. Some of our depots, or actually some of our cemeteries have got places where we can dispose or store it, and it is something that's it is going to be a problem as we go forward. We have got without the still sort of discussion that we'll present later on. We have got funding application in to look at this problem, and there is work nationally and at the European level around putting grass into anaerobic digestion. So in many ways an energetic outcome from it, which captures the methane that's released when it decomposes, would be I suppose a good sustainable sort of circular economy approach. But I think there are there's a lot of work already been done on this, but it's not a ready off the shelf answer yet.
Yeah, for us, we've had to treat it as a case by case basis. So our pilot sites are primarily in the public realm, so there's perhaps less tolerance in those settings to leave the cuttings on site. But as part of that project, we've identified areas on the site with the street scene operatives to put those habitat piles and things like that for the cuttings where we can, and we're monitoring it to see how quickly they break down and how much time it takes for them to become less sort of visually obtrusive, because it's quite a shock to people to see the grass disappear, one day and then get piled up at the corner of the site and things like that. So we're fielding questions from members of the public about that. They're kind of challenging us on that at the moment as well. So it's a balance really for the bales and things like that. Some of them we take off site, and we're working with our green waste team at the moment to kind of assess them and sort of test them, and then hopefully we'll be using them as compost on some of our other sites like tree nurseries and things like that. So we're trying to kind of work out if there's a way of using this rather than see it as a waste product, but try and transform it into something we can use on other sites. But very, very difficult. I don't think there's an answer for it all, and it's going to be different in every setting, unfortunately.
I guess
I would agree with. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I'd just like to add, where we're in very urban areas, leaving it in corners, it also encourages fly tipping and garden waste. So it's something we would try and avoid.
Good point.
Yeah, I would agree with what's just been said there. We're doing the same thing over in the national park, where we're creating smaller compost heaps, and then we're removing those compost heaps towards the end of once they've broken down, and we're moving to a green waste site. We're finding that by doing that, we can reduce the amount of travel time that we're doing just transporting the actual cutterizings. But I would agree with what you're saying with the the incidences of people leaving litter there. As soon as they see a compost heap, they're starting to put their own compost there, which I suppose is counterproductive.
One thing I was wondering about, it comes up every now and then, but it comes back to that eternal issue of litter and dog fouling, has anyone made sort of farmer collection work, in large sites on the side of the road? Sometimes it's suggested, well, if you get a nice friendly local farmer that wants some feed, perhaps it could work, but it always comes back to dog fouling. I'm just wondering if anyone has had success with that method.
I think we had one site, well, actually Cabinet Park Cemetery, which used to be baled, but it's creating that relationship, isn't it? And then there's always this issue of how do you manage it, and at a larger scale on multiple sites. So I suppose for us it's just easier for us to actually deal with it ourselves, and then use the green waste for our own purposes. Whether or not going forward, when we start looking at more sites and more commitment to it, perhaps that could be an option. But I don't know. I'm not convinced by that one, I think.
I think it ties in with Daniel Blackburn's put in the chat there, an amazing looking piece of kit. Mark, did you say you've had something to do with this? So it's a verge harvester collecting feedstock from roadsides. So that verge is down there. That link is down there in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look at that.
The work I alluded to on anaerobic digestion was a European partnership with included Lincolnshire Council, Severn Way Energy Agency in the UK, and European partners. In certain areas of Europe, there's a requirement when you're cutting verges to remove the arisings. So a lot of machines like this are running in Europe and taking grass to anaerobic digesters on a fairly big scale. The Lincolnshire Council and Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust got together and did some pilot study work on this, and have essentially commissioned a bespoke front-end flail collector, as the one in the picture, with a blower on the back, putting it into a forage wagon for Lincolnshire verges, and that's going to an anaerobic digester, a large farm-scale one. There are lots of anaerobic digesters in Lincolnshire. The nature of the arable economy there very much suits it. I was involved with some work alongside that with Highways England, looking at whether this could be done on motorways, and we did a trial on the M180. It's great for big verges with big open rural roads with very low traffic volumes. Something like this isn't necessarily replicable elsewhere, and certainly in Monmouthshire and our verges, our rural verges, it's not really applicable. That's not to say that there aren't lessons that can be learned and ideas we can take from it, but there are. I understand that Highways England also did a pilot in Cumbria. The big challenge with grassland off-road verges is it is classified as a waste, whereas grass from a park or public open space isn't. So in terms of putting it into anaerobic digestion, the digestate can't be spread on fields without a lot of testing and licenses from the Environment Agency, and I'm sure NRW would be this similar sort of line. So as I say, not an off-the-shelf package, but certainly it's interesting to see how that's working out. I understand that there is Harry in Snowdonia have been doing some similar work on small-scale approaches in a similar way.
Well, yeah, Pete Frost, NRW in the chat, has just said anaerobic digestion must be the way of the future. Nationally, we're growing huge areas of crop, i.e. the roadside vegetation, fertilised for free from nitrogen emissions from traffic, and we're paying to cut it. How can we afford to waste this resource? It's a very good point. Something we should all look into a bit more, I think. One of the things I wanted to go right back to sort of basics, really, and if you're someone that's got very little knowledge of this kind of machinery or any kind of machinery like me, and you're sort of tasked with purchasing this machinery for your council or whatever, where will you start? What are you going to be looking for? Big question.
I suppose you'd have to look at what sort of sites you want to start cutting. I mean, in our case, we we sort of knew that our city around Ackland in general, we have quite a lot of wet sort of areas, which drew us to sort of purchase the big LogLogic soft tracked machine, because obviously we knew that on our countryside site we would be likely to be cutting in conditions where you'd be likely to get stuck if you were using a normal four-wheel drive machine. So using a machine that was operated on tracks made much more sense. And as it turned out, it was a perfect machine for the larger sites. But of course now, as we're progressing and we're sort of expanding this, we have to look at the grass verges, so we have to take into account the sizes of the verges themselves, which meant that you would only have access to a certain amount of machinery. Ride-on was the best option also, because it means that it doesn't really necessarily require further training than your basic operation sort of training. So really, it's taking into account the size of the sites, the access as well, because access is also an issue for us, because although south of the county borough we have quite wide, big sort of road verges, as you travel up towards the beacons, you're talking much narrower sort of spaces. Often it could be somewhere where you have a lot of traffic or you have a lot of parked vehicles. So it's thinking of the logistics of then getting the equipment then on site and using it. So yes, it's just, I suppose the starting point for me would have been looking at exactly where you're trying to cut and the conditions and access possibly.
I would say there's some fantastic knowledge and experience out there. I mean, that's part of what today's about. But let's say from my past life, I know Nikki Rivers at Sheffield Wildlife Trust was running a project funded by the Royal Society of Wildlife Trust on good practice in road verge management, trying to bring all that information together. So there's a lot of really good practice out there. So I think calling around, networking, and speaking to people and looking at their situations to see which ones look relatively close or similar sort of situations to you, and just go and get. I appreciate it's difficult in the current state of play, but go and have a look. See the stuff. For me, I like to see the stuff in action myself. I like to go and have a look at the situation, and I find that's really helpful.
Definitely. So for those we've got a question in the chat from Lucia again. For those with slightly smaller machines, when you've got bigger sites that you might be looking to cut, is there an option to sort of cut only half the area in one year and then alternate it in the future? Is that logistically difficult?
I think that's fine to do, but obviously you won't get the benefits of the kind of annual cut and collect cycle. So that's kind of why we're kind of looking to do cut and collect annually, particularly as well. A lot of these sites are very kind of rich, the soils they're growing on. So I think if you were to leave them, they go rank pretty quickly as well. So we're looking at kind of leaving edges and borders, so there is a bit of kind of diversity within the grass and sward and things like that, but generally I think the key thing that we're doing is making sure that we're not taking on too much with the equipment that we've got. So as we're increasing the sites that we're looking at, I'm looking at that video that we've just watched there and thinking, right, which one of these machines is probably going to be best for us as we expand outwards. So I think it is an option, but obviously it's a trade-off between the benefits that you get from doing the cut and collect and the sort of time element involved in doing it as well.
Yeah, I agree. The smaller kit is sorry. I agree. The smaller.
Sorry, Steve.
Okay. Sorry for that. I agree with you. The smaller kit that we've purchased is only good for the smaller sites where we need maneuverability. The bigger kit on our bigger sites, we use that. It's just not cost effective because you have to empty the hoppers so often. It just doesn't work. So it depends on the site you've got, and I think the smaller kit has got its place very much so, where we've got to maneuver around orchards and things like that. But when it comes to the vast open areas of some of the meadows, then we just buy in bigger kit.
We might have lost Mark for a minute, but we've got a question from Matt Brown in the chat. What time of year do you cut the verges, and how many times per year?
We tend to cut once a year. Sorry. We try to cut once a year, and we usually start, all things being equal, although there was delays this year, we start sort of beginning of September. Some sites we delay it till about October. It's very much dependent on what sort of flora we're trying to encourage as well.
When I was cutting verges previously, I had the biggest problem is trying to get buy-in from the local communities. And one of the ways I did it was I used an annual mix and a perennial mix as well. And we cut just before it was just about to flower, and probably about mid-June. And then what we found was that it still flowered, but just a little bit later, but it elongated the flowering period way into September, October. Which proved quite useful when you were trying to get local communities to buy into the fact that the verges were going to be turned over to just wildflower meadows rather than having to be cut 16 or 17 times a year.
Yeah, it seems to be something that's quite case by case again, isn't it, as well? If you're, like Marie said, if you're looking for a particular type of vegetation, or you wouldn't, where you might cut a neutral meadow site in mid-July, you wouldn't want to do that on a site for Devil's Bit scabious, for example. So, but then the Plant Life has got that road verge guidance that's really comprehensive. So it's worth, looking at that and chatting to local ecologists as well, I guess, isn't it? And your local experts.
On our wider verge network, we cut once after the 1st of August, I think, and that's about 78% of the county, but that's the rural areas, so it's not in and around where people live and stuff. In the public realm, each site has this sort of bespoke management plan, and we tend to cut after August really and do a collect, and then over the autumn and winter it kind of falls in line with the rest of the kind of standard cutting regime, and then we simply stop cutting those areas in March. But we kind of taken a leaf out of Monmouth's book and kept the maintained border around the edge of the site, which we found has been really, really useful to kind of show that it's change in management, not an abandonment of management. I think that's kind of the key thing there. But it's different settings as well, and it's very difficult when you're dealing with policies that cover an entire county to kind of match up to the nuances of different habitats that you're going to encounter there as well. Really, really difficult thing. So yeah, probably not getting it right all the time, but I think overall it's steps in the right direction.
Yeah, no, it is difficult. And Liz Dean's just put in who's one of our colleagues from RCT, that we're now being challenged to think about cutting times for fungi as well. So obviously they're different again, and also different, they require different things. So, it's important to think about all of these things. But I did want to have a chat about the frame. The cutting of edges. So I drove through Monmouthshire back in the break in the lockdowns, and they look absolutely stunning, with where you've got sort of patches of wildflowers, and it's very neatly maintained, and you can see that they're supposed to be there, and that's looking to be a very effective mechanism of getting the public on board. The sort of the practicalities of that, and does it take more man hours? Can you talk a bit about that?
In response to the man hours, given that we would have been mowing those strips anyway as part of the annual mowing regime, it's less for them to do during the summer. There are, as I'll talk about later, potential pinch points later in the year, but we found it's a good compromise, and it does, as I say, it does reduce the amount of "you've not been round and cut our grass for however long" complaints, because they recognise it's a deliberate policy.
And do you cut and collect those edges as well, or are they sort of normal cuts?
They're cut and fly. There's a possibility that we could cut and collect in the future. Now we've got the arms and mowers, but we're learning all the time, and things, and we have been promoting in our communications. This isn't the end product. Things will continue to change.
Definitely. I'm just reading some of the chat as well. So Matt Brown said there's a lot of focus on pollinators, quite rightly, but on Flatholme they've noticed huge flocks of finches feeding on the ragwort that's left to flower and seed this year. so that's difficult to know the best time to cut. So that is another thing, is, you know, obviously you do need to leave, or in an ideal world there'd be some long grass left over winter for, you know, overwintering invertebrates and finches and so on, who will be feeding on the teasels. You know, how do you get around that? Do you leave some?
That's something that we would like to sort of move towards, but our verges at the moment, because a lot of them that we're focusing on the pilot project are so rich, you know, we really feel like the focus at this point in time is going to be getting the nutrients out. So, you know, the cut and collect for a while before we can kind of start to bring a more interesting species mix in that would support some of these species that are going to support other types of life. So I think, yeah, it goes exactly back to what Mark was just saying about, you know, these are going to change over time. So we're trying to make that clear to people. But yeah, I think that's what we'd like to do, is kind of leave patches, you know, not have it all so that you're kind of getting rid of an entire habitat overnight. You know, it would be ideal to kind of leave borders around some of the edges of these sites. But again, case by case basis, and it's not going to be appropriate on every site as well. So yeah, it's a big job.
It is. I'm going to do a plug for your next talk at this point, Joel, where Joel's talk is coming up at, well, next, is it, or at 3:30, which is about mapping biodiversity on the verges. So that's, you know, a way of showing the public what you're actually doing as well as you go along, isn't it, and sort of keeping them engaged with it. I just wanted to go back again to sort of more practicalities of the machines themselves. Seems to be two different ways of working with the cut and collect machines. It's probably more, but you have the auger system, which sort of mechanically takes grass back up into the collection box, and then you have suction as well. Has anyone got any opinions on what's better of those two?
We opted for the Amazon because it had an auger system, and again, because of the time of the year we were cutting the grass, the ground conditions, etc. The belief was that by using the auger system, it was less likely to clog as it was pushing it back into the hopper. And you know, it's so far so good. It seems to have worked. From experience using the big soft track machine, which works through a suction sort of system, we know that it does cause clogs. So that means that periodically they have to stop and actually unclog the chute, you know, to allow the grass to travel back into the box. So, you know, I suppose it's a little bit of second and see, and dependent on the conditions and when you're cutting, in terms of whether or not you're going to use one system or the other, I suppose. But I think the auger is a good system, because it does prevent having these big clogs, which you often get with ride-on mowers as well, or even your normal pedestrian, your run-of-the-mill garden mowers, where you get blockages if the grass is too damp. So. Yeah, I think that is where the Amazon sort of comes on its own, really, on that one.
I agree. Our cut and collect used for formal areas get clogged. When we demoed the New Holland as a comparison to the Amazon, with our crews present, they were in agreement. The auger's better. It's less likely to clog. It's an overall a more reliant and robust system.
I would agree with that as well, in terms of that when we were getting our cut and collect, I was cutting later on in the year, and when the grass was quite wet, which it is at that time, we were getting blockages, and the guys on the ground were spending not a huge amount of time, but some time unblocking it. It just depends on how wet the ground is when you were cutting.
No, it's useful to consider, because the Veil machine, you can see it's designed to sort of have quite a few different attachments, and it was a suction, and he did mention that it's different, you know, in the longer cuts and with things like knapweed in the arisings, it can get blocked easily, and it doesn't always want to pick them up. So it's worth thinking about that, I think. And you know, he said it'd be good on a finer sort of grass, but not necessarily on the rougher things that are sometimes what we're cutting in wildflower grasslands. We saw the two Amazon Profi hoppers. So RCT has got the bigger version, the 1500, and Monmouth has got the 1250. You know, this might be a silly question, but why sort of go for the two different types? What was your reasoning for going for one or the other?
Of RCT, we went for the 1500 because we knew that we wanted to cover the width of most of our verges, and 1500 was probably the average size for it. The 1250 would have been a little bit too small for us. It would have meant that they would have had to travel more onto the grass verge to cut what we needed to cut. So it just made sense to us, and the capacity of the box as well sort of played a part in it.
If I had more money, I would have bought the bigger one.
I was going to say it probably comes down to money. Yeah, they're not cheap machines, are they? No. Mark, you probably won the prize for having the most machines in this. Have you got a particular favourite?
Well, we've only had the Amazon. We've only just got it this year, but I think it's like all things. It's horses for courses, isn't it? The Amazon rear wheel steer, auger fed, front, flail. You can spin it on a penny round a tree in a small play area, open space, whatever. So you can do cut and collect in take it right into the town. Those tractors aren't suitable for that. Equally, the Amazon, for some of our bigger verges and open spaces, it just isn't big enough. And we've got some larger areas where we do have farmers come in and cut and bale it, because the reality is you need, for those areas you need something bigger. So it is really horses for courses.
Real. Well, we've managed to keep talking for a long time. There's a lot to discuss. I think you can see why we've all been kept so busy this year in meetings and talking amongst ourselves about what machines might be best. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for sort of taking the time to do it and go out and film all these machines and then to come on our panel as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to offer my thanks, and especially to those who put the videos together and gone out in trying circumstances that we had this year, to get that together and to share your expertise and your knowledge, and that's been fabulous. Especially when you're starting a project, it isn't easy to know where to start even. So having that little bit, having that good support behind you is good to know. And thanks also for leaving contacts within the videos that people can contact you later on. That's really useful. And just to remind everybody that the videos will be posted on the Whova platform, and also will be at the Wales Biodiversity Partnership website at a later date.